In this video, we're going to see how to create a Scrum board in Scrummy.com. A Scrum board is integral to our design document and our process, and it really helps us work together as a team so that we know what's coming on the horizon, what the most pressing issue is that we need to address next, and really gives us a good idea of if we're going to make our sprint goals or not. So Scrum board and the stand-up and the other Scrum mechanisms that we go through are really a good way to just kind of make sure we're on track with our project. Now, there are many different software tools that you can use to make a Scrum board. Trello is very popular. Jira does a great job with integration from documentation all the way down to source code. And there are several others like Rally. Scrummy I like because it's just right for a class like this where we can just very quickly create a Scrum board without signing up for an account or doing any other kind of stuff like that. So to start with, we just go to Scrummy.com, and then we will, after the slash, we will come up with some kind of unique name. So I might say Plant Places Mobile 26. And if no one has taken this yet, we get a brand new Scrum board and we can do whatever we want with it. So we'll give this just a moment to render. And you see it gives us a little kind of get started. Now, some important things that I want to point out. On the left side, we will have stories. Stories are typically functional, so think of something that a user can do with your application. Stories are not technical. Don't think something like set up the database or create a table. That would be a task or a sprint task, and these sprint tasks belong to stories. Now, where do stories come from? Stories typically come from our product backlog, and it is the role of the product owner to decide which stories will play in the coming sprint. In other words, which stories will generate the most value for the user. One thing that we do in Scrum and Agile is we know that stories are always going to be evolving. So in other words, we're not working with a fixed scope. We know that we're going to have more stories that get added as our capabilities change, as our competitive environment changes, and maybe some stories that aren't providing any value anymore that we're going to take off the list. So the stories on the left, this is essentially our product backlog or the list of features that we wish to work on. Now, where do the features come from? Well, we know, of course, we said the product backlog. In our case, we get to cheat a little bit because I have a finished version of the application that we're going to build this semester, and we can take a look at some of these features, and we can make stories out of them. Before I jump into that, I will talk about one special case story, or maybe even two special case stories that we'll do. Many times at the very top of a Scrum board, we will put a RAID story, risks, assumptions, I forget what the I is, but something in dependencies. In other words, these are things that we want to keep track of so we don't forget what they are. So any kind of risk in our project, anything that we want to keep on the front burner and not forget about, and then 3 weeks later realize, oh my gosh, we forgot to schedule this. So a lot of times we'll put a RAID task on the top. That's not a true story. It's just to keep our attention. Now, I did say that stories should not be technical. They should be functional. But you might say, oh, wait a minute though. I need to get my GitHub space set up. I need to get my IDE set up. I need to talk with my group members. I need to make sure that we're all on the same page. So that's one call out where many times we'll make a story called environment setup. And this is just us understanding our environment. So you see, now I have a story and I can add a task to this. So remember, story is feature, task is a technical step that we need to take to complete that feature. So I could say create GitHub repo, and the Scrum Master, Product Owner, GitHub Administrator should do that. That's pretty quick. We'll just give that 1 hour of time, and you see that starts over in to do. Okay, we might also say synchronize IDE, let's say IDE versions and build versions. So what I recommend is one team member, the product owner, GitHub admin, Scrum Master, first of all, set some standards and say, this is the version of the IDE that we're going to use as a team. This is the version of the build software, so on and so forth. Let's stay consistent. Now, that one person should create a project and create a GitHub repository, and then push that project to the GitHub repository. Everybody else from the team should clone that project from the GitHub repository. In other words, if you have a team of 3, you should not have 3 people independently starting a new project. If so, it will be very difficult to merge. It's better to have one person start the project, commit, push, and then everybody else clone, so we're all starting from the same point. So synchronize IDE and build versions. Maybe give that's an easy one. We'll give that just, give it a couple hours because there might be some research involved. And then we'll say, okay, what else do we want to do? We'll say push first commit to GitHub so that others can clone it. We'll give that about 2 hours, and then we'll choose save. So you see, the environment setup is the story, and then we're creating all of these different tasks out here. As soon as we do one, like create GitHub repo, or as soon as we start working on it, we'll take this guy and we'll move it into in progress. Now, typically, let's get this guy out of the way. Once it's complete, we'll move it to a verify step. And a verify step is where we do some kind of testing. Now, you might think, okay, this is related to software, and typically that is. There is going to be some kind of testing related to software that we build, but you could also have a peer review on something like a design document or a use case document. So something in the verify step that's not necessarily a program test, but just a colleague looking over your shoulder and making sure, okay, yeah, everything looks good. Now, once that step is complete, we take this task and we're going to move it over to done. Once all of the tasks for a story are moved to done, then that story is done. So we see we've done a couple, our RAID story and our environment setup, probably a bit more we can add to this. Now, one important thing I'll point out is that it's a good idea, after we get into some real features here, it's a good idea to thoroughly task out 2 or 3 stories that you plan to work on this sprint, but don't bother tasking out the other stories. In other words, when I'm taking a look at these Scrum boards for grading, sometimes I'll see maybe 8 stories, each of them with 2 sprint tasks on them. That's not really ideal because you can't do 8 things simultaneously. A better approach is to pick 1 thing or 2 things or at most 3 things and fully task them out. Think of everything that you're going to need to do for those. For the other 5 stories, 4 or 5 stories, go ahead and list the story here, but don't bother tasking it out until you're ready to work on it. That's step number 1. Number 2, in progress, there should only be, count your team members. If you have 3 team members, there should be no more than 3 things in progress. In other words, we're assuming that our contributors are going to work on 1 thing at a time, and they're not going to be spread thin across multiple items. Now, if something's blocked, we need to mark that as blocked, and then you can move on to something else. But there should only be a maximum of 1 item in progress for everybody on the team at any point in time. If you see 25 things in progress, you're not working right. People are spread too thin, and people are doing different things and getting distracted. So, little note on that. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at some of these stories that we're going to have here. So first of all, you notice that there's kind of a unique color theme going on. So we're going to have a story to just essentially theme the app. Okay, and in this, what are we going to do? Okay, we might pick, or let's say select an inspirational photo to provide colors. We'll leave it at that, and then I'll say in parentheses color wheel. Okay, that shouldn't be too bad. Maybe 1 hour. Oh, by the way, these numbers here are in hours, where the stories are going to be typically ranked in story points, which isn't a measure of hours or days. It's just a measure of relative complexity. So select an inspirational photo. Okay, then we'll say update app properties with colors or color scheme. Okay, and save. Now let's say we'll maybe create some icons. So one principle that we know about in Android development and generally around the world is that pictures are faster than words. If you take a look at this, you'll see some well-known symbols that we use across our application. Consistent styling, consistent theme. And reason is twofold. First of all, it declutters the screen. If I had the word save, it would be a lot more stuff than just a picture of a save icon. Or if I had the word take photo, it'd be a lot more stuff than this camera icon. And people are kind of used to these icons. They know what they mean. That's part one. Part two, keep in mind that people who use your app don't necessarily speak the language that you speak. So by using icons, you're able to communicate to a wider audience. So create some icons, do something like that. We probably also want to create activities, and let's say create fluid layout. So an activity is something that, like a controller, it handles button clicks and the like, where the layout is typically XML based. So create some activities, we'll give that maybe 2, and like so. Okay, so what else do we have in our application? Well, first of all, we have a search by color screen that's not complete, but I can describe it nonetheless. In the search by color screen, what we're doing is we're letting the user select an image from the SD card or take a new photo, and we can inspect that photo for colors, and then we can provide some feedback on some plants that have that color in it. So take just a moment for the emulator to come up, just because I have this running in an emulator, but nonetheless we have the photo. We click the photo, you see, and in just a moment it will give us an opportunity to say we want the photo. Yep, there we go. And then we'll see a little thumbnail of the photo back on our original screen. And in the Real Production app, it will kind of look at this photo, pull out some common colors, and then show us plants that match that color. So lots of things going on here. The story is going to be search by color. And for this one, what do we need to do? Well, we need a screen. We need the activity we created up above. So let's say invoke camera. Okay, invoke camera. That one, invoking the camera alone is fairly simple. We'll give that 2 points. But we also need to receive the image via a callback. We'll give that one a couple of hours of effort. Okay, we need to create buttons for image capture and gallery. We'll make that one task that does 2. There we go. We need to invoke the image gallery, because there are actually 2 options that the user has here. The user can either invoke the camera. We'll just pull this back over just a moment. The user can either invoke the camera or can open the image gallery. Either way is going to work for us. So now one other thing that we need to consider are permissions. So prompt for permissions, and then we need to handle the response. Is it an accept or a reject? That one actually can get a bit involved. Let's give that 4 hours. Okay, now we need to make a little image viewer for picture acquired, and I'm going to leave it at that for this screen because we're not actually going to do any search by color. But you see, what looks like a very simple screen very quickly can get involved. Now, we also have our GPS of plant screen, and this has quite a bit going on. This is where we're going to spend a lot of our time. So you notice that there's a GPS at the top, which updates every minute. And then there's an autocomplete here, and just given that I'm in the emulator, it may or may not give me the autocomplete option. Yep, there we go. We got our autocomplete. So I can select Eastern Redbud from here, and it's not only autocomplete, it's actually matching what I'm doing right now with this plant called Eastern Redbud. In other words, Eastern Redbud is a plant. It has a genus, species, cultivar. But I could go out and physically touch an Eastern Redbud in my front yard, and that's a specimen. And that's essentially what we're doing here, is we're assigning a specimen to this thing called Eastern Redbud. So we see we have GPS. That could be a feature. We have the autocomplete. That could be a feature. Now we have location. We'll say something like Cincinnati Zoo and Botanical Garden. Probably mistyped a couple things there. Not too worried about that. So this says a location where we can associate several plants together, kind of like a park. All of these plants are in one park. Description, we could give it some kind of description. Now under here, what do we see? Well, here's our camera icon. So you see we are going to toggle the camera once again. You also see, well, that's taken a moment to come up. We have a save icon. We have an open icon, so we can take a look at any previous plants that we've GPSed. And we also have an upload icon. So you see lots of different activities that we can do from this screen. Let's not consider that screen one feature because there are many things going on. So first of all, as soon as we have multiple screens, we need a menu. So let's say menu, and under this we're going to say create standard menu, and that's not too bad. We'll give that maybe 1 hour. But then we also need to do a little trick where we remove the current screen from the menu. So we want to minimize clutter in an app in general. We don't want to throw too much at the user. So if we have a menu, it doesn't make any sense to have a menu option to go to the current screen. In other words, take a look at this GPS a plant screen, and you see the menu option we have here is search by color. If I click that, it goes to the search by color screen. When I go to the search by color screen, we no longer have the search by color menu option. Instead, we have the GPS a plant menu option. So you see we need to remove the current screen from the menu, and we're going to do a neat little trick there called the template design pattern. So we'll go ahead and give that a couple. Then we'll say also handle button clicks for the menu. This one fairly straightforward. We'll go ahead and say a couple hours on that one. So you see, we're starting to add a lot of tasks. Now I'm going to add some of the new stories, but I'm not going to task them out. Remember, we want to thoroughly task out maybe 2 or 3 stories, and I've done more than 2 or 3 here, but nonetheless, we want to thoroughly task those out. Then the other stories that we're going to get to in future sprints, let's just go up ahead and put the story here. Let's leave the tasking for later. And by the way, the tasking should be a group effort. Everybody should have some input. So let's just list out some of these other features. We'll say GPS a plant screen. So that's making the screen itself. And so we're not going to worry about tasking that one yet. Then let's say autocomplete plant names. That one's fairly involved because we have to know the difference between the user typing an existing plant versus the user typing a new plant that we don't know about yet. So GPS a plant, okay, capture image of plant, okay. Now we'll say maybe handle GPS location, and then we'll say something like save specimen. And I think that just about covers the stories we're going to have on GPS a plant. Who knows? As we work through, we might find a few others. But nonetheless, we see now we have our list of stories. I did do this a little bit out of order. We would generally think of our stories first and come up with this entire list of stories. And then after that, the product owner would typically select the stories we're going to work on, and then we would task out those stories. So I did the tasking a little bit early, but nonetheless, when it's all said and done, this is roughly what the Scrummy board should look like. I will say I could probably beef up some of these tasks a bit. If I see a story that only has maybe 3 tasks, I think I probably didn't consider everything. So, you know, only put the tasks that you need, but 6 tasks, 8, 12, somewhere in that range, that's what I typically see. So that is the easy way to create a Scrum board with Scrummy. I'm going to post this link on Blackboard. I hope this is helpful. And I want to take a look at your Scrum boards. Just make sure that you're set up for success. Make sure your team members know what to work on. So I'll give you a little bit of feedback on them. But generally, if it looks something like this, maybe with a few more sprint tasks on those top stories, you're in good shape. So I look forward to seeing what you have. Thank you.